Let's go. Our guest today is a creative and driven doer who has the ability to draw on both his business and technical background so that he can add value from strategy to ideation to implementation to sustainment. He has a multidisciplinary background with experience in portfolio project management, process improvement, programming, and engineering across a wide range of industries, which has provided him with the range necessary to develop a framework for bringing innovative ideas and new approaches to the table. He's a leader in the AI space who has worked with several major organizations such as Manulife, Deloitte, and WestJet. Over the course of his career, he's established himself as a leader in our space who has been able to unlock real business value using advanced analytics. So please help me welcoming our guest today, a man who is passionate about mentorship and building high functioning and engaged teams, Jeremy Adamson. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on the show. I appreciate having you here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor. I love the show.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to have you on. I fly WestJet quite often, so it's pretty cool to have somebody from the analytics department in WestJet. I know we're going to get into your book, which I highly recommend, Minding the Machines. This is going to be a great discussion. We're going to dive deep on processes, and then maybe if you're up for it, we can talk about some maybe data science use cases in the airline industry, and we'll take questions from the audience as well. So, folks that are watching, folks that are here, please feel free to ask questions. We'll be happy to take them. So, Jeremy, talk to us a little bit about how you got interested in data science and what was your path into the field like?
Yeah, of course. I had kind of a convoluted path, really. I don't want to date myself too much, but I was a web developer back in the early 2000s when the dot-com crash happened, and I thought, holy, there's no future in computers. What am I doing with my life? So I cashed in my chips, and I went to university to study civil engineering. I figured people are always going to need roads and bridges, so I worked as a project manager. I helped design intersections. I did traffic impact studies. But then I was really fortunate. I worked on a project with the government of Alberta to create a collision prediction model as a algorithmic overlay over their capital planning process. So it was my first time using R and using some collision information, historic collision data. We figured out what certain fixes would do to the collision rates at intersections. So at the time, there was no AI or data science function. I think I was called a infrastructure management systems engineer, but it was my first taste of that type of work, and I was absolutely addicted. So I kept going down that path from there.
It's interesting. So this was like before data science, AI, machine learning was like buzzwords or hot phrases. They're just kind of doing predictions and forecasting type of stuff. Like, what was that data like? Was that all just tabular data? Was it, unstructured? How did you model that?
Yeah, a lot of it was tabular, but each region in the province submitted it in different ways. So some would have nice clean CSV, then other ones would have free form officer reports when they were at the scene of the accident. So there was a lot of work in getting the data stood up for sure. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, and that's an interesting use case because I feel like public data, open data portals have a lot of interesting information like that available that if anybody wanted to get their hands on, they could do some kind of similar-ish nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Um, so how much more hype has data science, AI, and all that become since you first broke into the field?
Yeah, definitely a lot. I don't want to sound like a hipster, like I was into it before it was cool, but when I started, there were uh, two paths really. There was operations management and decision support systems. So if I can be impolite, neither were as cool as data science is. If you had a stats background and you wanted a job in industry, then business operations op management was an option. And then if you had sort of a light technical background, knew Excel, then DSS was an option. But as they started to marry and get rebranded as big data, then data science, and then AI. It really took off. And I think, sorry, what's his name? Tom Stavenport did an article back in the early 2010s where he called it the sexiest job of the 21st century. And for some reason, that really stuck. People love that.
Yeah.
And I think from there, it really took off.
So, given your background and your history in the field, I'm just curious. We're coming up towards the end of the year here. It's the end of 2021. If you're live streaming this, it's the end of 2021. If you're listening on the podcast, this is probably sometime in June 2022. So it's a good way to kind of gauge predictions or the forecast for the field. So what do you see happening in 2022 in data science and analytics? Like, what's the big thing that you're excited or hopeful about?
I think if we're looking really close in, like 2022, 2023, the story is going to be about a talent crunch. Uh, I don't know if you've been involved in hiring, but since COVID started, location doesn't matter as much. The inflation on wages has been insane. Contractors have bumped their rates like 25%, and recruiters are knocking on everybody's door. And what I've seen with legacy companies, mid-tier companies, is that they can't respond quickly enough to that. So they have concerns about pay band equity. So if you can't compete on salary, you end up with really two tiers of people. You've got ones that are super passionate about the company, they love the industry, or you end up with transitory people who are sort of putting in their time, waiting for the next opportunity. So I think that's going to be a really interesting dichotomy and kind of set the stage for the next few years to come.
So, I guess so. Over your career, you've got tremendous amounts of experience, both with hiring and with leading teams. At what point did you decide to write a book? So, the Mining the Machines, excellent book. Highly recommend you guys check it out. Wiley publication. Really enjoyed this. At what point did you decide that it's time to write this book?
Yeah, I started writing the book actually at the beginning of COVID, but I think the motivation came quite a bit further back. My first data science-esque job, the one that I mentioned with the government of Alberta, they had a particular set of issues around adoption, about getting the full value out of their investment in the practice. And then my next role was a completely different industry, completely different function. They had the exact same issues. I went to insurance, aviation, didn't matter the function, if it was marketing, if it was commercial, finance. I'm seeing all these companies who want to create business value with data science and analytics, and they're all struggling in the exact same way. So I figured that there's probably something to explore a little bit here. So, personally, I really wanted to give back to the practice too in some way, help the companies for sure to find value. But I found practitioners were making the same mistakes, and they were kind of at the mercy of organizations that didn't understand them. So wanted to help both, I think, to reframe what they do.
Yeah. Again, guys, Mining the Machines, excellent book, especially if you're a senior data scientist or a leader, or you're looking to get into that position. You cover a wide range of topics in this book, things that I don't see discussed that often, and something that I wish that I had the blueprint for. I wish this book was written 2 years ago when I was a lead data scientist starting a team from the ground up. You cover the strategy, the process, the people, and all that stuff, and we're going to get into all this, double down mostly on the process part of it. But you mentioned that you've been kind of throughout your career, you've went from a number of different industries for different industries. When you're switching industries, what's like the most difficult part about that, right? Because I feel like the work that we do is a bit universal-ish, right? Data is data, but context is necessary. So I guess, what was the challenge from switching from one industry to another? Like, if you could share some of those.
A lot of it is around learning to speak the language and acclimatizing to the new domain. If you don't establish credibility with folks in the business, it's going to really hard to sell new approaches. So it's imperative that you can build strong relationships, and they feel like you speak their language, you're working in ways that they're familiar with. But at the same time, you need to be able to establish credibility with the team. So you need to be able to switch gears pretty quickly. So each Each company has their own patois, their own way of looking at things for sure, but each industry too, they have different ways of looking at things, different concerns. Financial services, when I went into that, I was completely unprepared for how much the regulatory environment has an impact on what they do day to day. So very, very risk averse. And, right away I had to study that weekend. What is OSFI? What are the regulations they're subjected to? How does GDPR affect them? So just being able to, be nimble and see what their thoughts are and what their personal concerns are, and be able to empathize with them, I think is the biggest thing.
And as you've made your way across these various industries, like uh, have organizations been facing the same struggles with getting their heads around analytics? Is always like the same kind of issues when it comes to establishing analytics teams?
I think at the root of it, it is, and there's so much opportunity for what we do to help other people, other companies, and it's unfortunate, but I use a stat from Deloitte all the time. They did a survey a few years ago, and over half of executives that they surveyed said data science and analytics is going to fundamentally change the way that we do business in the next couple of years. And then on the other side of that, there's a bunch of studies from Capgemini, Fast Company. I'm sure there's others that 80% of these initiatives are failing. So a huge disconnect there. But the number one thing I see with these companies is that they always see data science and analytics as a technology play. They think once I have a data lake, once we do a cloud migration, once we have data quality, a few more PhDs, all these cool tools, then value will just appear from the ether. We'll do data science. It's going to be great. But, they don't understand it. They don't know what they want out of it. It doesn't align to corporate strategy. It's kind of this thing in isolation that they've kind of built without understanding what it is. So I think that's the main thing.
And so you organized your book around three pillars. So talk to us, give us an overview of these three pillars.
Yeah, those three pillars are strategy, process, and people. So on the strategy side, like I said, every activity of the data science function needs to be aligned to corporate strategy. It needs to be seen as a competitive differentiator involved in long range planning. It can't be a backroom function. It's got to be seen as a part of the company and a profit center for the company. And then on the process side, it's all about consistency, like brutal consistency in execution, in delivery, having people with advisory skills, being able to build a pipeline of high value projects. Again, not just winging it as requests come in. And then the third was people. The most important one, really. People tend to hire for technical ability, especially in less mature companies. I'd say that they want someone with 10 years Python, 5 years SQL, as many cloud certifications as they can get. But at the end of it, that's not really what you need. You need creative people who are passionate about the field, about finding solutions. So,
yeah, like 12 years of Kubernetes experience.
yeah,
Right? I see exactly. Stuff like that on resumes, on job descriptions. So a lot of my audience will be finding themselves as leaders building data science team if they're not already in that position. So what are some guiding principles? You discuss a number of great principles in the book, Minding the Machines. You guys check this book out. What are some guiding principles that we should keep in mind to ensure that we're successfully building and leading those teams?
I think the main one is value creation, and I throw that term around quite a bit because I think it's so core to what we do, especially when we're establishing ourselves in new companies. Every activity of the team needs to be about creating value for the company, and that should be tracked and reported on, and you should have that on a flagpole marching around proudly, because executives, again, they don't really understand what we do, that they see it as a backroom function that's ancillary to what the company does, something that they can pull out when they need to. They think, we as a company, we make packaged goods, we sell insurance. But if as a leader, you can stand up and say, hey, we are not a backroom function, we're a profit center. And if you bring us into the conversation, you will sell more goods, you will sell more insurance, you will reduce your overhead. That's what's going to build the team. That's what's going to get attention and solidify your position. But it's psychologically very safe to let yourself become a backroom function where you're just waiting for instructions to arrive. But you can't do that, especially at the beginning. You need to be out there kicking down doors, looking for ways to add value and building relationships.
So for someone who kind of finds themselves in that situation where they understand their potential of their team, they understand the potential they could bring to the company and not be just a cost center, but be a source of value creation. How should they go about having some of the? How should they go about kicking down the doors, so to speak? Right? Like,
Yeah.
well, what's the etiquette behind the kicking of the doors?
I I always try to find an executive champion, and there's always one. It's a huge investment to start up an analytics team. Very expensive people. The tools are expensive. It's a lot to take on. So find where that support is coming from in the organization. Get them on your side. And the other thing is actively pursuing projects. A lot of the time, teams, especially in their infancy, they wait for people to come to them with ideas, and they tend to be fully formed. We want a model, and they think, yeah, that's what I do. That's easy. So they kick it out, wait for the next project. But there's so many high value things in every company that the stakeholders don't see the opportunity because they don't understand the function. And because they're not reaching out, we as the practice don't even know that it's there. So I think leaders, senior practitioners, they should be dedicating time every week to relationship building. Find people in every function, citizen data scientists, people that are, well integrated with the company that can, if not gossip, then, share the struggles. And eventually things will bubble to the surface. And as they come up, start putting them in a project pipeline, start running AOI 101 or sorry, AI 101 sessions in the company, ideation sessions, design thinking sessions, be top of mind for people when they have problems.
Yeah, and you discuss design thinking in the book, Minding the Machines, which I recommend you guys check out. We'll get into design thinking part of the book, but I want to double down on the process aspect of the book. So, talk to us. Like, what is process, anyways, and what is process all about?
Yeah, maybe it's my engineering background, but when I got into the field more formally, a lot of it is ad hoc. It's based on who's doing the project, who the stakeholders are, and they just kind of wing it. So process is just about consistency. It's defining in advance how your group deals with really each part of the analytics life cycle. So what handover looks like, how you do debriefs after projects. It's creating an environment where your stakeholders know what's happening and the folks on the team know exactly what's expected at every step. And then if you can get that right, if everybody has those expectations, they know exactly what to do, then you're not responding to these update requests. You're not fielding urgent requests. You're just focusing on the creative work and the exciting stuff. So it's about consistency at the root of it.
Yeah, I like that emphasis on the creative work. I know you talk about when we'll get into it a little bit too about data scientists as crafts people. I saw some reference to a friend of the show, John K. Thompson, as well. He's been on the podcast as well, so I enjoyed seeing you guys align on that type of mentality about what data professionals are like. But process can get messy, man. It can get entangled. It can get you know convoluted, I guess. What are some ways that we can ensure that our processes remain parsimonious? And if you got any examples that you want to share with us, I'd love to hear that as well.
Yeah, parsimonious, really word of the day. I think it appears in the book about 100 times, but it's all about everything being as simple as possible, every part of the process. So, goes without saying, but if you're spending an hour typing up a project update, that's an hour you're not spending on the actual project. So something I like to do whenever I start with a new client or a new employer is I survey their staff. I get a breakdown essentially of where every individual on the team is spending their week, and roll the time up so that we can, really see where all that's going. It's a jarring thing to see in a Sankey diagram where all of the time for your staff is going. And 9 times out of 10, the groups are only spending 20, 30% of their weekly hours on actual projects. So really you need that data to be able to come up with a plan. And usually once they have that revelation that so much time is getting burned, it's enough to get you support to make changes. So that's the big one. The second one I find is debriefs. Once you review processes, it can't just be a one and done type of thing. You need to take time after every project to look at how it was executed, talk through as a team, how it could have been done better, and to have a attitude of continuous improvement, just to keep you sharp, make sure that you're staying relevant, make sure that process is always top of mind for people.
Something you talked about in your book was this idea of these comprehensive group of processes that are required for project success. Can you touch on that a little bit? Touch on that concept and maybe share some of those groups of processes.
I get into some depth. I think that's probably the thickest part of the book. But the first part is intake. It's basically where the projects are coming from. And if you think of, again, less mature companies, it usually comes informally and fully formed. It's an email that says, hey, Billy, can you predict sales by month? But it really shouldn't be that way. So you need processes in place for how the problem is formed, how that touch point happens. And then once you have those, high level ideas, you got to prioritize. So knowing what's next on the docket, having a way to evaluate them objectively so that you have a defensible pipeline. Once you have that, it is scoping. So turning that into a problem statement, something more meaty, understanding the dependencies, making sure that you have what you need. And then planning, I believe, was the next one. So taking that scoped out problem, you have all the dependencies, high level, what's expected out of it. And then you create a work package that you're ready to execute on once the people roll off of their other projects. And then execution is a whole other subgroup. There's sprint planning, there's communication, forming a steering committee, weekly updates, how to do debriefs. And then the last one really is handoffs. And a lot of teams, even ones with processes, don't have any formal steps around handover. So they end up with a lot of these zombie projects. They're never fully closed. There's a lot of emails from the stakeholders. Hey, I have one more little change type thing. And that just, burns a lot of time. So you need to know what done looks like, and you need a formal psychological bookend to the project.
Zombie projects. I like that. The term I use is just data lakes filled with orphaned model binaries. So much the same concept. So you talk about the human aspects of process and prioritization in your book. And there's 3 human factors that you mentioned that we should consider when it comes to prioritization. Before we get to that, actually, it probably would make more sense for us to understand just maybe some tips on how we should go about prioritizing our projects and assessing what the priority should be.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of different things attempted, and it seems like the most common one is the number of POCs. So a team is at its best when they put out a lot of POCs, and that sounds great in theory. You want to fail fast and iterate and all that, but what you end up with and what you incentivize is a lot of unused projects. The worst one I've ever seen was a team that was a spinoff from business intelligence. So in their minds, the reports that they generated was their value add. So their KPI was number of reports. They thought this team is at its best when they create more and more reports. So you can imagine where that leads to. But the only thing I've seen that works is value creation. Whether it's cost reduction, revenue generated, you can look at customer lifetime value if you're sophisticated enough. But the company is evaluated on profit. Your group is being evaluated on profit. I don't think that you should try to find a clever proxy. You need to get to the source and really align your team around that. Anything else, if I can be unpolite, is really an abdication and a admission that you're a cost center and an investment for some future day when you bear fruit. So there's other considerations for sure. You want to balance across stakeholders. You need to be flexible for immediate requests, but I think value creation really needs to be the guiding principle, especially around prioritization projects.
And when it comes to prioritizing, we can get into those three human factors not to consider.
Yeah.
Walk us through those.
Yeah. You're challenging my memory a little bit. The first, I believe, was challenge. Incrementalism is a real danger. A lot of the time, teams will find their sweet spot in the company. They'll land on a project that has created value. It's got positive attention, so they'll iteratively tackle that problem. Say, that they did a marketing project and it led to good sales conversion. So they will spend years just tweaking that, getting those marketing models, finely tuned. But as that's happening, your competition is thinking bigger. So really, you need things in the hopper that are moonshots, things that excite the company, things that inspire. They might crash and burn, but it gets the company and your team excited to have those things in there. The next one was challenge. You can't expect your team to dedicate their careers to these small tedious tasks either. They need to have things in the pipeline that align to their development objectives and help them to grow and just increases engagement for the team. And then the third one, I believe, was align. It needs to be important to the company. You can't confuse what's cool with what's useful. So natural language processing is a great example. It's a really cool concept, but so many companies are trying to find a way to use it where it just doesn't make sense. So you don't want to be a hammer out looking for a nail. You want to be doing things that are important to the company.
And when it comes to I guess, identifying things that are important, we talk about this with respect to project scoping and planning, that there's some questions that we should, ask ourselves and ask our stakeholders, two crucial ones. Can you share those questions with us, and what is it that we hope to get from asking those questions?
Yeah, of course. The first one is whether or not it's something that we should even be doing, if this is an analytics problem or not. And I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think we should always start with the posture that this isn't for us unless we see it as being something that we can add value to. So a lot of the time it'll actually be a BI question. They want a report, but BI doesn't have time, or it'll be IT or data service problem that they just want a CSV that they can play with that has some sort of fancy join in it. But if you do all of those, if you help out your colleagues, you're killing them with kindness. You're not going to be able to work on meaty projects, and IT and BI as workaround, you're just going to be really delaying solutioning a problem with resourcing and other teams. So really, you have to start with that. Is this an analytics play? Can we add value to it? And building off of that, if you do take the project on, is it something that the business can solution? So if hypothetically we do create an operationalized model, is there the flexibility in the business to adjust processes to take advantage of it? So there's so many models that are just sitting on the shelf, essentially, that haven't been implemented. And it goes without saying, if it's not implemented, you haven't done anything. You haven't added value. You've destroyed value. The second part, I think, in scoping and planning is, are they asking for what they want? And it's almost never what they say. I think it's important to put out there that nobody except for us and people on the call really care about the models. So stakeholders might say, we want to predict conversion rates, but they don't want a model that predicts conversion rates. What they want is to improve conversion. So what they're asking for really is, what are the drivers of conversion, or what changes can we make to improve conversion? So those are similar questions, but a very important distinction, because that really changes how we tackle the problem.
So when it comes to dealing with stakeholders, right, let's say we've identified that this is a problem that we should be working on. but how do we make it that how do we frame it from like the business problem to an analytics problem? uh,
Yeah.
what are some questions we should use to tease out what we need to properly frame it?
I really like the in Agile, they have that user story format. They have as a blank, I want to blank, so that blank. So right from the start, you're looking at the objective. You're not looking at the approach or the technology methodology. It's all about the outcome. So if they say, for example, I want to reduce attrition, that's something that you can figure out. You can ideate on what the best approach is to get there. But what happens a lot of the time, if you don't have any structure around this, is that they try to speak your language. They'll say, I want to predict attrition, but again, that means something very different to us. And if we didn't understand what they meant, we would burn a lot of time on something that they couldn't implement. So that's the main one. Is everything that you do, you should start with the business outcome and then work backwards to find the most parsimonious way to create that outcome for them.
There's a question coming in here from Joseph on LinkedIn. I think it fits in nicely here. Joseph would love to hear your opinion on measuring ROI or value measurement and building a business case for future investments in data science or advanced analytics.
Yeah, that's a huge one, and it's something that I spend an inordinate amount of time on with any company that I'm in. As we have this project pipeline, and I don't know if we're going to get into that, but essentially it's as they ideate, it goes into a pipeline. As we plan, we move it further along and build out those projects. As they move forward in terms of maturity and understanding, we always need to be tuning up what we expect the value creation to be out of that. Again, if you have customer lifetime value, you can be looking at churn rates. If you have a cost associated with onboarding or hiring people, then you can look at employee satisfaction. So it doesn't need to be strictly cost and revenue, but everything should have a number with it. And as those projects get completed, I always tally them up, and every quarter I'm sending that around to everybody that will listen. I'm saying, we've created this many dollars of value. We've kicked off this many projects with this many teams, and never let them think that you're not killing projects, that you're not creating value. They should be bored of hearing about how much value you're creating. And it's a lot easier to get budget approvals, get new tools, get new headcount, get contractors in that are specialists in certain areas if you have that, because that's really, for people holding the coin purse, that's all that they care about at the end of the day. It's not the POCs that you've created, it's the amount of value that you've created for the company, which is, core to what we do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Great question coming in there from Joseph. Joseph, we got another question that we'll get to later on in the in the show. I think will fit nicely in the random round. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And in the same chapter of the book, the process chapter, which that's the one I doubled down on. It was a great chapter, and there's something in there that you talk about called design thinking. So what's design thinking? What's it all about? And what does this have to do with process? What does this have to do with data science?
Yeah, design thinking is a great ideation framework for understanding, based on the business outcome, how we can tackle that. It's, I think, 5 simple steps. Business advisors, BA type people use it quite often. The first one is to empathize with the stakeholder. And that's a word that I think we need to be saying a lot more in this practice is empathy. So first off, you talk to them, you understand what they want, why do they want it, what have they been doing, what are their constraints, what are their personal motivations, professional motivations for seeing this through. Really double click on how the situation impacts the person. And then once you have that figured out, then you can start to define what you're trying to do, really. And then from there, just knock out as many ideas as you can for how to solve it. There should be stupid ideas, great ideas, impossible ideas. Really get them all out into the open, explore the whole, possible space of ideas, because they're going to help you to identify constraints and limitations, even if they're not practical. And then from there, you can choose a few prototype, test them out. And from one session, you might be able to, come up with a dozen ideas that can go in your pipeline and things that you can tackle later on when it makes sense.
And it seems like it seems like design thinking requires some skills that are kind of underdeveloped
Yeah.
in a lot of data science and analytic professionals. How do we cultivate those skills and make that process enjoyable for everyone who's involved?
Yeah, I think they're there deep down, even if they're not naturally expressed. I feel like people are genuinely oriented towards helping each other out, and I think it's natural that we want to serve others, make them happy. So even the most introverted person, and I'm quite an introvert myself, so I think I'm speaking from experience. If you've created a solution that genuinely helps somebody in their daily work, that feels awesome. That builds the confidence in the process, and it's kind of a self-reinforcing thing. Once they have some successes under their belt with that, it tends to open their mind to continuing down that path. But you have to start with somewhere, and I think that team composition needs to be considered, especially as you're building out teams. A lot of the time, companies think we need the deepest possible technical skills, so you tend to be staffed with a lot of Steve Wozniaks and no Steve Jobs. And I think we as technical workers like to think, Steve Jobs had nothing without Wozniak, but really it's a symbiotic relationship. Neither has anything without each other. We need balanced teams with diversity of thought, diversity of approach, if we're going to be at our best. So, for a team that's really unbalanced, I would suggest just opportunistically trying to reorient towards more extroverted, communicative BA type personalities. It's a pretty high churn profession, and as people move on, you can look to stack it towards a more client facing team while still making sure that you have the technical chops to be able to execute.
Yeah, you got to have the ability to both build and sell, I guess,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
that's right.
So, uh, you talked about Agile a little bit. You touched on it just a couple minutes ago here. I'm wondering, when it comes to executing a project, does Agile have a place in the data science world?
Yeah, absolutely. But you really can't abuse it. I think there's a lot of organizations who they use agile for an excuse for not meeting deadlines. So you need to be taking the best elements out of the framework. And most companies on their larger projects, they're still working to waterfall. So you need to be able to adapt to meet their expectations. So in the background, you can still do work to sprints rather than usual waterfall approach, but just make sure that it jives with what they're doing, I would say. Yeah.
Another good question coming in from LinkedIn here from Brandon. I think it fits in nicely with where we're at right now. Do you have a structured approach for generating demand within an organization, especially for new teams where all business functions are our customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Art of the Possible, ideation sessions, AI 101. Wherever I've been, I've always created a deck and a 1 hour session that's just always in our pocket. And every director, every senior manager, anybody who we think we could work with, just reach out to them. If you have any team meetings coming up, we would love to prepare. We present. We can do a 20-minute session on what we do, how we help you, how we add value. And the other thing is relationship mapping. Everywhere I've worked, again, I try to make it a personal objective for even individual contributors to have a few people in the organization who they're checking up on, so they understand their constraints, what their focus is, what their priorities, what their pain points are. And if we ever see a way that we can help them to establish credibility, to get some momentum in that function, then we should be making that investment of time and trying to go after those projects.
Thank you very much. Great question coming in from Brandon as well. So kind of off a little bit of a tangent here. You talked about this idea that was pretty interesting, this concept of a skew morph.
Yeah.
It's a word that I just recently came across as well. So what is a skew morph, and how can we use this to our advantage in data science?
Yeah, it's I don't remember where I read about it. It's some design book, I think. But essentially, the idea is that people are much more likely to adopt a new approach or a new technology if it has familiar elements. So if you think of like keyboards, for example, uh, QWERTY, the layout that we have, came up from typewriters because it was the most inefficient possible layout, and it prevented those little hammers from getting jammed together. So much better ways to lay out the keys, but we kept that because as people transitioned from type pools and typewriters, they were a lot more comfortable moving to word processors and digital keyboards. If you consider, even on some Apple phones, I believe, when you look at your contact list, it still has design elements from old Rolodexes, those old physical, things. So there's a bunch of studies on this. People like familiar stuff. They like songs that they've heard before. So what it means for us basically is that whenever we are changing a process for our stakeholders, we should do whatever we can to minimize the appearance of that change. So give it a familiar elements. Uh, Even if the output is inefficient, I would save any proposed changes for future phases. So you can rip the guts out of a process, but as long as the inputs and the outputs look the same, the stakeholder is going to feel like it's familiar. They're going to be much more likely to accept it. So I would never get creative with naming, with color schemes, anything like that. I try to make everything as comfortable as an old pair of shoes, and then they're much more willing to accept that you've made fundamental changes. You've replaced averages with a fancy neural net model. They don't care about that. As long as all of those elements are there, they're much more likely to buy into your approach.
Yeah, I love that. Love that idea. I heard about that concept of the skew morph recently. I was listening to, I think it was like the Tim Ferriss podcast with Chris Dixon, and he mentioned how the original iPhone had a books app, and in the books app, it looked like a bookshelf with library books in there, and you
Oh yeah.
just click take it out. Question coming in from Christine on Agile, since we're just talking on that topic. She wants to know if you know of any studies about how Agile methods can be applied to teams in data analytics or finance.
To be honest, I don't. It's a bit of a challenge to try to bring the business into that, just because they're so used to waterfall. People with tech backgrounds, though, are a lot more amenable to the idea. So, yeah, I wouldn't try to convert wholesale from what they're used to strict, agile, Scrum ban, Kanban, whatever you're reading about. I would try to do it incrementally, and again, just take the best elements that work for your situation and try to contextualize it to your team and culture, and just make it a slow iterative process. But I'm afraid I don't know of any specific studies about it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for the question too, Christine. Let's kind of get into the people aspect of things.
Yeah.
I think now is a good transition point for that. So you talk about the data science hierarchy of needs. Break that down for us.
Yeah, I think where this came from is that most organizations I work with, once they hit a certain size, they start to think of a talent, capital T, as this fungible asset. They're interchangeable, productive units who just convert inputs into outputs. And I really want to challenge that idea and present them as individuals with human needs. So if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs from introductory psychology, people need safety before they worry about love. They need love and belonging before they worry about self-actualization. Similarly, people in the practice have their own sets of needs, and once one is fulfilled, they tend to move on to the next one, and it changes what compels them and what motivates them. So at the base, of course, they need to be paid a reasonable wage. I don't think that most of them are motivated solely by money, but you need to be able to put on your winter tires. And then once they have that, once they're getting paid, they're not worried about laundry machine breaking down. Then they need the tools, they need the data, they need to be able to do their job. So now they have the tools, they have the money. Now they want to feel integrated. They want to feel like part of the company, part of the team. They need to be happy to come in to work. So once that happens, they like the people, they have the tools. Now they're starting to build self-esteem. They're respected. They want good projects and to feel like, what they're doing matters. It's not that incrementalism that I talked about. And then the idea is once they've climbed the ladder, once they have everything in place, once they're at the peak of that, pyramid of needs, they've reached their fullest expression. And what they start to worry about at that point is creative approaches to these problems. And that's the best place to be. Their needs are being met. They're in a safe place, great team, cool work. And creativity, I think, is really the peak and where we always want our team to be. These wonderful individuals, not productive units, but individuals who are each somewhere on that pyramid. So we as leaders should really know where they are and do everything we can to get them further up that hierarchy of needs. So that was the rationale behind it, was just challenging that idea of productive units and technical resources.
Yeah, I love that approach. It's kind of like change the way that the organization views the people, but then that helps data scientists view themselves in a different way as well, right? As crafts people. So talk to us about this. What does this mean? How can we start viewing ourselves as crafts people? I guess, what do you mean by a crafts person, and how can we start viewing ourselves as that?
Yeah, what I mean by it is there's a big difference between a software developer, someone that's a DBA. What they do is supremely important, and I don't mean to denigrate it at all, but they work best with convergent thinking. There's approaches out there that work, and if they're used in the right case, then it comes to a good effect. But the work that we do is so fuzzy. It's at the margins. It's political. It requires a divergent approach to be at its best. So rather than seeing ourselves as somebody who in the presence of these stimuli does this, and then that's the correct approach, we're people who take a fuzzy problem, a personal problem that's motivated by any number of things, and then we find a technical solution to that. So we need to be people helping people. And because there's so much, fuzziness around this, we're not technical resources. We're craftspeople. We're creative. So, how to see ourselves like that, I think it's different for everybody. But the way that I made that, emotional transition, I think, is I stopped seeing myself as an employee, just some dude waiting to be told what to do, and more like a person who was individually valuable and renting my time and expertise to another group of people. So just remembering that you were hired to help solve problems. And I think that's step one, is really to see yourself as a person helping people, and data science is your toolbox. It's not technically what you do. So if you think of other, craftspeople, a cabinet maker or a painter, that their clients don't approach them with a fully developed drawing and say, do this. You know what they want, what they like, their constraints, and then you use your own abilities to create a beautiful solution for them. So, psychologically, I think that's the root of it. You don't see yourself as a person creating models, doing what they're told, getting paid bi-weekly, but you're somebody who solves problems using your experience. And I think if you can make that transition, it's not just helpful for the company you're working for, but you feel personally a lot better too. Like there's a lot more agency over your life and your work.
It's a question coming in from Joseph here. I think it fits really nicely on this topic. Joseph on LinkedIn is saying that in his experience, it's been extremely hard to hire and keep great data scientists. Do you have any tips that have worked for you? I think you've touched on a few of those, but if you got any additional tips for that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a high churn profession for sure. So I don't think in most cases you can expect people to stick around for 5-10 years. Usually, 2 to 4 years is a reasonable amount of time. I would make sure that they are seen as an individual, they are treated as an individual. You understand what they want out of this relationship, that you are giving them projects that line up to what they want to be doing. It aligns to their personal growth. They have all of those physiological needs. They're being paid enough. They have the time off that they need, but still that they feel like they're part of something bigger than just themselves. Too often, and especially since COVID started, people have tried to entice people to stay by making life as boring for them as possible. So they say, take half a day off on Friday. On Wednesday, we're going to give you cupcakes. Take your birthday off. Have an extra week vacation. Don't work too hard, type thing. But nobody gets into this because they want an easy life. It's a challenging, grueling, high stress occupation. They want to be out there doing meaningful work, fighting the good fight, and they need that sense of healthy conflict, I think, to be at their best. So, definitely look out for their well-being, do everything you can to make sure that their needs are being addressed, but don't go so far as to make life boring for them, because you're just going to, get the worst out of them and then push them out the door towards something more exciting.
So apart from the technical skills, what is it that you look for in data science candidates? And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. The main two things that I look for are, even before technical skills, if I can be honest, are creativity and adaptability. I think creativity, because it needs to come from passion, you really need to get a buzz solving these types of problems and to enjoy the process. If you like well-defined data sets, well-defined problems, you're probably going to flounder once you hit real life. And then adaptability is the other one, because the practice is always changing. No matter what your domain or your industry or your function, things are always in motion. So you need to be able to change with it, and you can't be the type of person that says, well, I'm the Python guy. If you need me to use SQL, if you need me to use R, then you have to send me to training. If they install Snowflake, send me to training. So part of the fun with this field, I think, is that it's so dynamic. Things are always changing, but that means you need to be always dancing to stay relevant. So I think those are the two big ones: is creativity and adaptability.
And so, as a leader yourself in the industry, having worked in multiple different amazing companies and just kind of moving up, what does it mean for you to be a good leader in data science, and how can an individual contributor embody the characteristics of a good leader without necessarily having that title?
Yeah, I think in this field, and probably more than most, is it's important to be a servant leader. You should want to be a manager so that you can help your team, so that you can help your stakeholders, not motivated by the ability to get in there and boss people around. There's always going to be smarter people, and if you're lucky, most of your team is going to be smarter than you in some ways. So you need to be comfortable with that. You need to be okay putting them center stage, give them the chance to shine, to lead projects, and you need to be able to give them all of the successes. They can own all the successes, but if they're not successful, you need to own that. So you're always, in that service mentality. And like you say, you don't need the title to do that. I really love when teams that I've been with have been able to organize and sort of draw on each other's strengths throughout projects. It means that they're communicating, they're trusting each other. It really needs to be seen as a team sport. You need to rely on your colleagues, and the ones that can get the best out of each other are usually the ones, I think, that are set up to be successful leaders.
Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Let's begin to wrap it up. We're gonna do the last formal question before we jump into just what I like to call random round. We'll do a few random questions. And this last formal question is: it's 100 years in the future. What do you want to be remembered for?
Yeah, I'll be cheesy and I'll say helping other people. That's really what it comes down to. If you help a conglomerate improve their bottom line, that's pretty satisfying. But when you mentor somebody new to the field, or when you help somebody land a job, that's a much better feeling. So yeah, that's what I would say. Remembered for helping people.
Yeah, I mean, you're helping a lot of people with this book. minding the machines. Those of you guys out there who are in leadership positions or going to be moving there soon, definitely recommend this book. So first question of the random round, let's just think about some kind of interesting use cases for data science or machine learning in the aviation industries. What are a couple of ways that machine learning is being used there?
Yeah, there's a ton of data in aviation, and it's all real time. So there's tons of use cases, and it's quite interesting because if you think of oil and gas or financial services, the other industries I'm used to, you see the impact of your decisions years in the future. In insurance, it might be 20 years before you realize what your changes have done. But in aviation, everything is in real time. You adjust prices, you adjust policies, everything, and you basically see it the next day. So one of the really cool ones that a lot of airlines are starting to look at it is dynamic and continuous pricing. In the background, aviation is quite archaic in the way that they do pricing and revenue management. But the technology is starting to catch up to the point where they can do dollar by dollar adjustments based on the persona that you are. So based on your history, your search criteria, past shopping behavior, they can tune a product that appeals to you individually. And I think that that's pretty exciting because, as they have disaggregated the product, as you have to select whether you're bringing bags, whether you want check to carry on, if you want buy on board, it's become kind of confusing and convoluted for a lot of people. But if we can infer based on your behavior what you value the most and how much of a discount it would take to convert on that, there's a lot of opportunities, not just for the company, but for the individual to really get a meaningful package.
Thank you. That's super, super interesting. And a lot of people out there will hopefully be researching some of these topics if you're interested to get into the aviation field. That's some good stuff to look into right there. So if you were to write a fiction novel, what would it be about and what would you title it?
Yeah, I've always had an idea kicking around about a perfectly logical person getting into to some misadventures and their internal calculations and deliberations. I think it would be a lot more fun to write it than to read it. I don't have a title yet, but tentatively, let's call it Logical Larry, I suppose. Yeah.
What are you currently reading?
Right now, I'm reading two books. One is from the Silo series by Hugh Howey, great series if no one's ever read it. And then another one is about China and the CCP called We Will Be Harmonized. So two great books.
What are you currently most excited about or currently exploring?
Most exciting thing in my life right now is that we're expecting a baby in February. So we've got two boys, a 6 and an 8-year-old. So it's been a while since we've had a baby in the house, but really excited for that. I think professionally, oh, thank you. Yeah, professionally, it's going to be teaching at my old university in the winter term. So I'm teaching a strategy course there and just loving the idea of being able to get back in the classroom.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to open up the random question generator. We'll do a few from here.
Okay.
First question. What's something you learned in the last week?
I learned to knit a little bit. So I randomly picked that off of the internet, and I'm terrible at it, but having fun.
That's awesome. What have you created that you're most proud of?
Oh, geez. That first job that I mentioned, that collision prediction model, that was probably the most meaningful project that I've been a part of, and still something I'm quite proud of.
Have you ever saved someone's life?
Not that I know of.
This is the last random question here. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
My son actually, knowing that I'm doing this podcast, asked if I was famous and has told his friends that I'm famous. So I'm quite proud when he says things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, you definitely are, man.
Thank you.
Authors, right? I mean, with the great publication like Wiley, great book. Definitely recommend you guys checking it out. Jeremy, how can people connect with you and where can they find you online?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way. You can just look me up, Jeremy Adamson, on there. And love to connect with anybody if you want to bounce ideas, anything at all. I'm easy to approach.
Jeremy, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on the show. I appreciate having you here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks very much. And again, love the show. Honored to be here.
Thank you so much. And everybody tuning in and listening, remember you've got one life on this planet. Why not try to do some big? Cheers, everyone.